So if you find this sleep story helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week, so I hope you enjoy this story. So as you listen to this sleep story, you can just take a moment to get yourself comfortable and to close your eyes. And as you rest there with your eyes closed, so I'll tell this story in the background. And as I tell this story in the background, you can just drift and relax comfortably asleep. And there was a woman out in space with her crew on a spaceship, and they were hurtling through space, heading towards a habitable planet that was discovered. And this woman had decided she wanted to be one of the first to visit an alien world. And from Earth they didn't know what this planet would be like. Only the chemical composition of the planet, that it had an atmosphere, that the atmosphere was breathable, that it was about the same kind of size as Earth, and that because the atmosphere has oxygen in, there's a chance there might be life on this planet. And the journey was a long one, but they developed technology to be able to get around the speed limit of light. And although this way around the speed limit of light allowed them to physically travel faster than light from point A to point B, it didn't allow them to communicate faster than light. Communication could only be sent while travelling slower than the speed of light. And so it's still going to take a few years for this ship to arrive at that planet. And now the ship is nearing its destination, and this woman and the rest of her crew are preparing for what may lay ahead. They're looking at what the planet looks like from distance, recognizing the familiarity of this nearing star in the sky, how familiar it looks to the sun. And the spacecraft has been travelling while spinning to create artificial gravity. And now the spacecraft is slowing and preparing to go into orbit around the planet. And the spacecraft doesn't have any windows. It uses cameras on the exterior of the craft, and then monitors inside the craft, so that they can look at the monitors, and as the craft starts to go into orbit around the planet, before anyone heads down to the planet, the craft is going to orbit the planet for a few weeks, orbiting about once every 90 minutes or so, to scan the planet close up, take photos of the planet in great detail, and then work out the best place to take a landing party down to the planet. And so after a few weeks of orbiting and gazing down on that planet and studying images of the planet, the team finds out that the planet is largely overrun with plant life. that there are animals down there, but it's largely overrun with plant life. But they also find that there are signs that once a civilization was here, that there are ruins of a civilization that are now all overrun by plants, that something's obviously happened that's ended that civilization with advanced technology. And everything checked out on the planet, that it's safe to go down there, it's safe to explore. And so they were curious to send a landing party down to explore some of the ruins. And a landing party go down to explore the ruins. And the woman takes the lead as she walks along what seems like it was perhaps a road. There's very little of it left now, as plants have reclaimed the land. And she couldn't be sure, because she doesn't know exactly how these plants grow compared to plants on Earth. But she worked out that it seemed like plant life had been growing over these ruins for at least a few thousand years, and that the plant life had made it very difficult to be able to clearly make out what's what, but it had also held the soil in place and made it so that in this area things were a bit more visible than they perhaps would be if soil or sand or something could flood over or blow over and cover it all up. And she thought to herself about how recent that is, how although it sounds like a long time in the past, it's actually very recent that another civilization was in reach of the Earth, and that had the Earth got technology perhaps 5 or 10,000 years earlier, maybe the two civilizations would have interacted and discovered each other. But at the time this civilization was active, humans on Earth were still just forming communities and starting to think about the idea of farming. And they explored these ruins, and these ruins were near some mountains. They could hear the sounds of animals, sounds almost like the sounds of familiar birds, the sounds of the rustling leaves as wind blew through the plants that seemed like trees, that everything seemed surprisingly familiar, that there were what looked like trees, there were what looked like familiar flowering plants, there were what looked like insects that were familiar, and birds and flying animals. And they were curious about how all of this life has sprung up to look so familiar to life on Earth. That under these conditions on this planet that must have been very similar to various conditions on Earth, different life found its niche in the same way that life has found its niche on Earth. that there are small animals and larger animals, flying animals, animals of all kinds, and everything just seemed so familiar. And they followed this path and realized it was curving around towards the mountains. And they kept following it round and round until it seemed to stop at the mountains. And near where it stopped, there were ruins on either side, totally overrun, with roots passing through everything. The roots essentially turning everything to rubble. But the woman was fascinated by something that she could see just lying on the ground near a tree. It looked like a painting, and it was in what looked like a plastic or some other kind of material container, as if it was designed to be preserved. And the woman and her team analysed this painting and identified that it definitely was a painting. It looked like a painting of this mountain range and what looked a bit like a family enjoying a holiday here. And the painting looked so familiar. And yet the family didn't look familiar. And the woman was excited at seeing what these aliens looked like that once existed, that must have had hobbies as mundane as anything done on Earth, just sitting painting your family and the landscape while they're on holiday. And the woman was curious as to why this random, well-preserved painting was lying here, near the mountains, in some kind of container, obviously designed to preserve it. And as the woman and her team explored the side of the mountain, there was an unusually flat section of the mountain. They were trying to figure out why the road led right up to the mountain and just stopped. It looked like at some point much of this side of the mountain had gradually begun to wear away and collapse and turn to rubble. But this very flat part was sticking out from all that. And the woman started exploring this flat part of the mountain, running her hand across it. When all of a sudden, somehow she triggered something, and there was a rumble, and the flat part lowered down into the ground, revealing a tunnel going deep into that mountain. And the woman and her team documented everything. They placed a relay communication device outside the entrance to this tunnel, in case there was a problem with signalling. Then the signal would pass down the tunnel to the relay device, and beam from the relay device back to the landing party ship, and up to the ship in orbit. And they walked down the tunnel, could hear the echoing of their footsteps as they walked. And as they walked, suddenly lights started turning on around them. And they noticed what good condition this tunnel was in, that it looked like no one had been in this tunnel, and the elements hadn't got to this tunnel in all the time since that entrance was sealed. And they followed this path deeper and deeper into the mountain, hearing their echoey footsteps as they walked. And then off in the distance they could hear sounds coming from deep in the mountain. And so they walked towards those sounds. And the closer they got, the more they realized it sounded like speech, like people talking and laughing and playing. It sounded like as you find yourself near a city and start to hear the distant hustle and bustle of a city. And after quite a while of walking, the tunnel opened up into a huge cave buried deep within the mountain. And what looked like a vast underground city. And the woman and the other astronauts could tell that this city was somehow being powered, that it was full of life. There was animals, there was intelligent beings, behaving just like humans on Earth behave. And someone approached them with a sense of curiosity as to who these people are. And in an unknown language they spoke to the woman, and she responded, saying who she was and where she was from. And they didn't understand each other, and so they drew a picture of the Earth, of the planet, of the stars around those areas, and still none of that seemed familiar to them here. And these people seemed incredibly friendly and welcoming, and the woman was curious how they were going to communicate with this race of people. And so they got out a computer device that had a program on it for recognizing patterns, that was designed just in case anyone ever encountered a pattern that seemed to be coming from an advanced civilization. And in human trials on Earth, the program had managed to translate different languages, recognizing them as languages, and then convert the patterns and translate it into another desired language. But its main function was to detect patterns beamed across space. But the woman turned on the device, picked up the sounds of the aliens talking, and as the aliens talked, so the computer program recognized patterns within the speech and was able to then convert that into the closest that it would be in the woman's own language, so that she could understand them, and then it was able to be used like a translator, that she could then talk, and that would be converted back so that the computer speaks in their language. And from this two-way communication through the computer, the woman found out that a disaster was about to happen to this civilization thousands of years beforehand. And they knew that they had to save themselves. And so they created communities underground in mountain ranges that would protect them from a solar storm that was due to strike the planet, caused by a reasonably nearby exploding star. And they knew when it was going to happen, roughly. And so they built these huge communities underground. They figured out how to make it sustainable, how to get all their energy from the core of the planet. And then, generation after generation, they've lived down here. And they lived down here so long, within these communities, with no way of being able to test what's happened with the rest of the planet. Whether the planet has recovered from that dose of radiation, whether life survived it, and they remained down here, and then forgot, as generations and generations passed by, how to use some of the advanced technologies that they'd had, including how to open the doors from the inside. And most of the people down here had forgotten all about the doors and opening the doors, had got so used to living in this community down here, where cities underground are connected by various means around the thousands of miles of mountain ranges, and they all have such a good life down here. But they had to take a step back in their technological advancement, and they all have led such a good life down here, enjoying the life they've got here, but not wanting to expose anyone to any risk, and so not wanting to figure out a way to leave. They've just accepted the environment they're in. And the woman explained that the radiation has gone back to normal levels, that life survived and thrived, that life always finds a way, and that if they want, they can always make a life for themselves back out on the planet, and that they can now have the help and support of another planet, the Earth. That humans from Earth are always willing to help others, to show kindness and compassion. And so, for the first time, they introduce these aliens who've never ever seen outside the mountains on their own planet to the world outside, that were last seen by this alien race thousands of years earlier, with the aliens that decided to shut themselves away in the mountains. And this alien race are incredibly grateful, and the woman knows they'll be all working together to help that civilization to build back outside the mountains in harmony with the natural world on this planet. And they share records of their past, of thousands of years of history, of a time before entering the mountains. And the woman and the other astronauts go back to their ship and launch up into space. Rendezvous with the ship in orbit, and then start their journey back home to Earth with a tale that'll be exciting to tell to their families and to humanity back on their home planet. And they settle in for the long journey and drift and relax asleep while the ship starts that journey home.